Hello, I'm Bakhtiar Sanov and you are watching A News. Let's take a look at today's top stories. European allies dispatch military reinforcements to Greenland amid unresolved US-Denmark talks. Palestinians skeptical as the United States announces start of phase 2 of 20-point Gaza peace plan. And Iran warns of retaliation if Donald Trump strikes as the United States withdraws some personnel from bases. Several European countries announced that they are sending military personnel to Greenland. It's after security concerns in the Arctic following recent remarks by US President Donald Trump wanting control of the world's largest island. Here is more.
A Danish Royal Air Force plane landed at Nuuk Airport in Greenland late on Wednesday, with personnel in military fatigues seen disembarking. Denmark's defence ministry confirms it's begun increasing its military presence in and around the island. He says they'll be working closely with NATO allies. The build-up includes more ships, aircraft and troops, with plans to protect infrastructure, support local authorities, deploy fighter jets and conduct naval operations. Meanwhile, Swedish Prime Minister Ulf Kristersson said Sweden has deployed military personnel to Greenland at Denmark's request. He said the move is linked to preparations for an operation known as Arctic Endurance. Norway is also contributing. Defence Minister Tore Sandvik said 2 officers are being sent to help plan future Allied cooperation. Germany announced it will join a multinational reconnaissance mission, deploying 13 soldiers to Nuuk on Thursday to assess possible military contributions. Meanwhile, France said it will deploy a small unit for a joint cold weather exercise with Denmark and other European partners. US President Donald Trump reiterated on Wednesday that the US needs Greenland and that Denmark cannot be relied upon to protect the island. He made the comment after talks between Denmark, Greenland and the United States failed to convince Trump to change his mind of wanting control of the island. Greenland is a self-governing territory of Denmark. Copenhagen controls defence and foreign policy, and the United States maintains a military base on the island.
Another immigration-related shooting has fueled chaos in Minneapolis. A Venezuelan man was shot on Wednesday by a U.S. immigration agent. It's the latest incident in the city this year during President Donald Trump's immigration crackdown.
A Venezuelan man in Minneapolis has been shot in the leg by an Immigration and Customs Enforcement officer on Wednesday night. The US Department of Homeland Security said the agent fired a defensive shot.
Back up.
They were both taken to hospital, according to officials.
Preliminary information indicates that there was a struggle with a federal agent in front of the resident. During the struggle, the federal agent discharged his weapon, striking one adult male. The adult male then retreated inside of the residence, where he remained inside and refused to come out. Eventually, federal agents made entry into the residence, and the individual was brought to an ambulance where he has been transported to the hospital.
Protesters and authorities clashed after the incident. Dozens of demonstrators shouted insults at federal agents, telling them to leave the city. Some fired fireworks at law enforcement. Federal agents used tear gas and flashbangs. 2 vehicles believed to be used by federal officers were also vandalised. At least 2 people were detained, according to officials. Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey criticised ICE, but urged protesters to return home.
Let's be very clear. I've seen conduct from ICE that is disgusting and is intolerable. If it were your city, it would be unacceptable there too. And for anyone that is taking the bait tonight, stop. That is not helpful. Go home. We cannot counter Donald Trump's chaos with our own brand of chaos.
The incident happened exactly 1 week after an ICE officer fatally shot 37-year-old Renee Good, triggering ongoing protests against the presence of federal agents in the northern US city. The latest shooting took place about 4.5 miles north of where Good was killed. Around 3,000 ICE officers have been deployed to Minnesota in recent weeks. The Pentagon is now preparing to send military lawyers to Minneapolis to assist the government's case.
The U.S. State Department is suspending the processing of immigrant visas for citizens from 75 countries. It's part of Washington's intensifying immigration crackdown. The pause will begin next week, and the move will allow authorities to deny visas to applicants deemed likely to rely on public assistance. The suspension covers Azerbaijan, Armenia, Georgia, Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, as well as countries across Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Middle East. Palestinians in Gaza are reacting with anger and disbelief after the United States announced the launch of the second phase of its plan to end the war. Many say conditions on the ground show there has been no real progress at all.
Frustration and skepticism are spreading among displaced Palestinians in Gaza after the United States announced it was moving ahead with a second phase of its plan to end the war. For many, the announcement feels disconnected from what they say is still happening on the ground. People forced from their homes by months of fighting say there has been no visible change in daily life, with airstrikes continuing and basic needs still unmet.
What second phase or first phase? They haven't even started the first phase yet. How can they start with the second? They've been bombing since this morning. They targeted Tufa and Zaytun. Houses are coming down. Which second phase?
This is the enemy. What do you expect of it? To open the crossing? It's all lies, all empty talk of opening the crossing and doing this or that. And what did they let through? Cola? Is cola what we need?
Israel says hundreds of aid trucks are entering Gaza each day with food, medical supplies, and shelter materials. But international aid groups argue the deliveries fall far short of what is needed. The second phase, announced by US Special Envoy Steve Witkoff, calls for a transitional technocratic Palestinian administration in Gaza, alongside steps toward disarmament and reconstruction. The proposed 15-member body would be led by former Palestinian Authority official Ali Sharth and overseen by an international board under a plan agreed by Israel and Hamas last October.
Portugal is facing an uncertain outcome in this Sunday's presidential vote, with no clear favorite emerging among the top candidates. Recent polls show a tight race and suggest the contest is likely to go to a runoff for the first time in 40 years.
Portuguese voters will head to the polling stations on Sunday, knowing the presidential election will likely end up in a rare runoff, the first in 40 years. It comes as political fragmentation leaves the race wide open. A recent poll shows far-right candidate André Ventura, leader of the opposition party Chega, slightly ahead with 24% of voting intentions. He's closely followed by socialist Antonio José Seguro on 23%, while João Coutrinho de Figueiredo of the Liberal Initiative is close behind within the poll's 2.2% margin of error. Two other candidates, including Social Democratic Party-backed Luis Marques Mendes, each have 14%, keeping the contest among the top five extremely close. Smaller polls in recent days have shown similar tight margins, highlighting the uncertainty of the outcome.
The days ahead will be really challenging. The result is unexpected. What is certainly expected is that we will have to go to a second round.
The Portuguese presidency, while largely ceremonial, carries important powers, including the ability to dissolve parliament and call snap elections. Despite Ventura's lead, his rejection rate of more than 60% suggests he would lose in a runoff against any of the other top contenders, leaving the final result uncertain.
Italy's Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni arrived in Tokyo on Thursday for a three-day official visit. She is scheduled to meet her Japanese counterpart Sanae Takaichi. The trip coincides with the 160th anniversary of diplomatic relations between Italy and Japan. Meloni will stay until Saturday before traveling to South Korea for a summit with President Lee Jae-myung. China says it's willing to deepen cooperation with Canada while eliminating what Beijing calls interference. That's according to Foreign Minister Wang Yi, who met with his Canadian counterpart at a meeting today. Prime Minister Mark Carney will also meet President Xi Jinping for talks on strengthening relations. Chinese officials said the visit aims to boost dialogue and deepen cooperation. Carney is in the country for a 4-day visit, marking the first trip to China by a Canadian Prime Minister since 2017. Trade between Brazil and China reached a record $171 billion in 2025. Brazilian exporters are shifting away from the United States as tighter U.S. tariffs make trade more difficult. China remains Brazil's biggest trading partner, driven mainly by strong demand for Brazilian commodities. Our correspondent has more from Beijing.
Brazil-China trade reached a record $171 billion in 2025, highlighting the deepening economic ties between the two countries as Brazilian exporters increasingly pivot away from the United States amid higher U.S. tariffs. China remained Brazil's largest trading partner by a wide margin, accounting for a substantial share of Brazil's total trade and trade surplus as shifting global trade conditions reshaped export destinations. The growth was driven primarily by commodity flows, with Brazil exporting large volumes of soybeans, crude oil, iron ore, beef, poultry, and sugar to China, while importing machinery, electronics, fertilizers, chemicals, and manufactured goods in return. Strong Chinese demand for food security and energy inputs supported Brazilian exports, while competitive Chinese industrial goods continue to dominate Brazil's import profile. The trade surge comes as U.S. tariff measures on key Brazilian products reduce competitiveness in the American market, accelerating a long-term reorientation of Brazil's external trade strategy towards Asia. Analysts say the 2025 figures show how protectionist policies and geopolitical tensions are reinforcing China's role as a strategic economic partner for Brazil and reshaping Latin America's trade structure. Manu Maktoum, A-News, Beijing.
The death toll after a crane collapsed onto a train in Thailand on Wednesday has risen to 32 people. The incident left 66 injured, some of them seriously, according to local officials. The accident occurred about 230 kilometers northeast of Bangkok. According to the state railroad operator, 195 people were on board. Multiple rescue teams and heavy machines are on the scene as investigators work to identify the dead and injured. The Thai army has also deployed specialized units to assist in recovery operations. Over in Abu Dhabi, the World Future Energy Summit is bringing the global race for clean energy into focus. Companies are showcasing innovations in solar, wind, and smart energy systems, while highlighting the growing role of artificial intelligence in the energy sector.
The World Future Energy Summit is currently taking place in Abu Dhabi, putting the global race for clean energy firmly in the spotlight. The three-day event, which commenced on Tuesday, has drawn around 50,000 participants from 114 countries, focusing on the latest innovations in solar, wind, and intelligent energy systems. Chinese renewable energy companies are taking center stage, with investments close to those of the US and the EU combined. A key focus at the summit is the role of artificial intelligence in energy systems, helping optimize design, operation, and output as markets mature. This emphasis on intelligent systems is visible at the Al Dhafra solar power plant in Abu Dhabi, the world's largest single-site solar plant that powers 200,000 homes and cuts 2.4 million tons of carbon a year.
China-Arabic cooperation not only accelerates the energy transition of both sides, but also provides affordable, reliable, replicable, and sustainable clean energy solutions for the whole world, especially developing countries. Moving forward, there's a huge potential for deeper cooperation within industry partners in the new energy sectors.
Beyond solar, Chinese companies are also advancing wind energy in the UAE, with the first wind power demonstration project supplying enough electricity for more than 23,000 households and reducing emissions by 120,000 tons annually. Officials say China-Middle East cooperation is key to meeting climate goals and boosting clean energy globally.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll examine the Trump-Machado meeting and what it means for Venezuela and U.S. policy. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. Today at the White House, President Donald Trump is scheduled to meet with Venezuelan opposition leader Marina Corina Machado, the recent Nobel Peace Prize laureate whose party is widely considered to have won Venezuela's contested 2024 elections, results that were rejected by then-President Nicolas Maduro. The meeting comes less than 2 weeks after U.S. forces captured Maduro in a dramatic operation and brought him to New York to face drug trafficking charges. Despite Machado's global stature as a defender of democracy, the Trump administration has recently signaled openness to working with Delcy Rodriguez, Maduro's former vice president and now acting head of government, raising questions about the U.S. commitment to democratic forces in Venezuela. Today we explore the political implications of this meeting for Venezuela's future and U.S. foreign policy. Joining us now is Gustavo de Aristegui, former diplomat who speaks to us from Tokyo, Japan. Mr. Aristegui, thank you for being with us.
My pleasure to be on your show.
Ambassador Aristegui, how significant is this meeting between President Donald Trump and Maria Corina Machado in the context of Venezuelan politics right now?
It is immensely important. Let's be very clear about it. Let us not forget that Maria Corina Machado started a movement of a massive movement that was called Sumate about 20 years ago, and it built from there more and more until it became actually an unstoppable movement. Let us not forget also that the Venezuelan opposition has been divided and even fighting each other and contesting each other. Some would contest polls, others would boycott polls. It was the first time ever that everyone that wanted to oust this terrible regime, that is the Chavista regime, coincided in the person of one leader. Mm-hmm. And Maria Corina Machado won the Nobel Peace Prize before Nicolas Maduro Moros was ousted from government, was arrested by the U.S. Drug Enforcement Administration, assisted by the Delta Force. This is what happened, not anything else. And finally, it is essential to understand that there needs to be a transition, and the only figure that can actually lead that transition, but not now, is Maria Corina Machado. They need to reach some kind of agreement and a timetable.
But given Trump's past comments expressing doubts about Machado's domestic standing, how might this meeting affect her political legitimacy?
You're very right to raise this point, because and if you allow me to make a historic, if you want, a comment that I have used many times on your show, everybody takes President Trump literally but not seriously, and his friends always say that he needs to be taken seriously but not literally. Well, right now what they're trying to do, in my opinion, and I do know, for example, Secretary of State Rubio personally, is that what they're trying to do is to preserve the possibility of an effective, efficient, and real transition from a dictatorship to democracy. Anything that would come out of the American administration in the form of support, unconditional or conditional, to anybody would mean probably the end of any kind of dialogue. Let us not forget that the repression forces of the regime are still in the hands of the most brutal part and the most brutal members of that regime, be it Diosdado Cabello or Vladimiro Padrino, who is the head of the army and has the Directorate General of Counterintelligence, which is one of the political polices, and Diosdado Cabello, who heads the Ministry of Interior and the police forces, plus the SEBIN, which is the intelligence service and political police, plus the militias. So if they thought that some kind of democratic solution was being forced on them without them being guaranteed some kind of immunity or to keep the illegally obtained fortunes or whatever of this kind of discussion, that would probably put an end to any kind of future, democratic future for Venezuela. So actually, I think that the person that is conducting this strategy very ably is the Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, and I probably think that there is much more of a strategy behind the words of the president and what the public statements are than anything else. Now, the regime knows that the United States of America can reach out and snatch, arrest, detain anybody. They did it with the president. Nobody was as protected as he was. So anybody is liable to be detained. In any case, I do want to stress very strongly, for those that say that this operation was not about drugs, let us not forget that some years back, and I think I've said it on this show too, the Drug Enforcement Administration made it very clear that directly or indirectly, or at least with a distant connection, Venezuela was involved with 24.3% of cocaine trafficking in the world. That is huge.
Ambassador Dario Stegui, has the U.S. approach undermined its stated commitment to democratic governance in Venezuela by engaging with leaders tied to the old regime?
I completely share your concern, but I most sincerely hope not. And I do think that the nuances that have been made by the Secretary of State are very clear in this respect. He can't be too clear. They cannot show their hand. If they do, as I said before, it would be disastrous. The most the most fierce and hard members of the opposition, of the regime, would probably try to derail any kind of efforts into initiating a path towards democracy and freedom. So I do think that they do have to hide their hand. Even if you look around the world, a regime that has survived everything, including cheating in elections and oppressing 30-something million Venezuelans, forcing 9 million into exile, using common crime to eliminate political opponents in the country that has had the highest number of violent deaths, violent homicides in the world for a very long time. Well, all of this is a reality that needs to be put into the equation. So what kind of Venezuela would we see if anybody would show their hand, or we would say from the beginning, Maria Corina Machado is going to come tomorrow to Caracas, is going to become the president of Venezuela? You would see 1.5 million armed people, 300,000 militia members, the army, the police forces, and God knows what else, going out on the streets and starting to kill the others that were not that are not in favor of the Chavista regime, something that has already been done in the past, by the way. So it is a very delicate situation, something that you don't want to feed the fire, fuel the fire with gasoline in a moment where the situation is very explosive. I think that the infighting of the regime is probably going to weaken it. Everybody is saying or doubting, suspecting their neighbor about their loyalty to the Chavista formula. And I have to tell you that I have direct information because I am half Venezuelan. My mother was Venezuelan. My cousins are informing me. My uncles are informing me every day. Some of my best friends are strategists of the opposition, and they are not worried about the final outcome of what is going to happen. Democratic transitions throughout the globe have never been done overnight. It is impossible. You cannot just switch off a dictatorship overnight or in 1 month. It takes a process. It takes a system, and this is what I think we're witnessing.
Ambassador de Aristegui, what are the broader reactions in Latin America to the U.S. re-evaluating its stance on Venezuelan leadership?
Let me start with the reactions of the Venezuelan exile. You know, it is very shameful, I would even say. It was even embarrassing to see how political parties and analysts around the world, especially those that come from the far left or even the moderate left, are telling the Venezuelans how to solve their problems, how to go about their own business, how to be Venezuelans in one phrase. This is completely unacceptable. Yes, you do have some countries in the world that have very stern reactions against. Some are purely cosmetic. The Russians and the Chinese, in my opinion, are just making statements. They're not going to go further than that.
Yes.
But then you see the most fiery comments in defense of this despicable regime that is the Chavista dictatorship came from Iran. And no wonder. Right now, the best, the strongest ally that the Islamic Republic, so-called Islamic Republic of Iran, has in the West is Venezuela. They have a direct flight to Iran, Caracas. In the past, it passed through Damascus. They are playing with each other's sanctions and helping each other with ghost oil tankers. The Venezuelans are laundering money from Hezbollah and from the Revolutionary Guard Corps. The Hezbollah has training grounds over there. The Revolutionary Guards go to Venezuela for leisure and rest. We're talking about the only country in the Western Hemisphere that has a solid relationship with Iran. And at the same time, of course, you do see the most left-leaning countries in the continent maybe being very critical. Cuba and Nicaragua, it goes without saying, they're part of the package. But let us not forget that two very important left-leaning leaders have been very tough with Venezuela. President Boric, the outgoing president of Chile, called them a dictatorship and called for the recount of the election, saying that he did not believe that Maduro had won. And even some leaders of the Uruguayan left have been extremely tough with the Chavista regime. And the very complicated relation that exists always between Colombia and Venezuela makes that somebody that is far left, as is the case of Gustavo Petro, is supporting the Chavistas one day and criticizing them the following day. But what really counts here, and let us not forget that this is an extremely important point, is that two of the strongest allies of the Venezuelan regime today remain the terrorists, and these are really serious organizations, FARC and ELN on the one hand, and then you have the drug cartels of Colombia that are allies, economic in this case, not ideological. The other ones are ideological and also partners in the drug trade. And this is a reality. And the Venezuelan regime is in direct contact with the cartels of Honduras and Guatemala and Mexico to export drugs to the United States. And they are responsible of the phantom planes that land in the Sahel and act as the main providers for drug traffickers that go north through the different routes of the Sahel or the Atlantic and Mediterranean.
Ambassador Gustavo de Aristegui, thank you very much for talking to A News. We appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. After the break, we'll take a look at the major stories from the region. Welcome back to A News. Now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. The White House says it's closely watching developments in Iran after President Donald Trump signaled that the violence linked to the unrest may be easing. His comments come amid conflicting accounts from inside the country and an ongoing communications blackout.
Killings linked to Iran's crackdown on nationwide protests are subsiding and that there are currently no plans for large-scale executions. Speaking on Fox News on Wednesday, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said, "There is no plan by Iran to hang people." He said hanging is out of the question. He also disputed reports of a high death toll of protesters.
There were terrorist cells. They came in. They used Daesh-style terrorist, operations. They got police officers, burned them alive. They beheaded them, and they started shooting at police officers and also to the people. So as a result, for 3 days, we had, in fact, fighting against terrorists and not with the protesters. It was completely a different story. The reason I have to explain, and this is important, why they started to shoot at people, for one reason, they wanted to increase the number of deaths. Why? Because President Trump has said that if there are killings, he would intervene. And they wanted to drag him into this conflict, and that was exactly an Israeli plot.
US President Donald Trump said he had received assurances from what he described as very important sources inside Iran that the killings had stopped. Asked whether that meant US action was now off the table, Trump said Washington would continue to monitor developments.
There's no plan for executions or executions. So I've been told that on good authority. We'll find out about it. I'm sure if it happens, we'll all be very upset, including you will be very upset, but that's just gotten to me, some information that the killing has stopped, that the executions have stopped. They're not going to have an execution, which a lot of people were talking about for the last couple of days. Today was going to be the day of execution.
Meanwhile, Iranians crossing into neighboring Turkey said protests in their region appeared to have eased, but many said they were unaware of events elsewhere due to an internet blackout.
Things were fine, brother. We, as Iranian Azerbaijanis, didn't have any fighting, arguing among us. There was some protests for a few days among the Persians.
Residents also described a return to calm in their hometowns.
In Iran, there were none protests in our city. No, there were none. They happened in the big cities. There were some complaints related to the high cost of living. They have decreased.
Meanwhile, Iran temporarily closed its airspace late on Wednesday, forcing airlines to cancel or reroute flights amid concerns over possible military action. The United States has also begun withdrawing some personnel from bases in the Middle East, after Tehran warned neighboring countries it would strike American targets if Washington intervenes.
3 weeks into the protests to economic foes in Iran, which turned to deadly riots, the government has eased up communication limits with one side, opening of international telephone calls from Iran amid escalation of tension between Tehran and Western countries. Our correspondent Tuğraç Şirelioğlu reports from Tehran.
The government in Tehran has started incremental opening of telephone and internet connections 3 weeks into the violent clashes which followed protests by businessmen to a foreign currency crisis and people's complaints over rocketing prices in Iran. Deadly street riots, including arson attacks, have subdued for the third consecutive day, and international telephone contacts have resumed. But it is a one-way call from Iran to other countries. International internet traffic is still down to zero, with an unprecedented blackout of 7 days, which security officials supported, arguing that rioters were given instructions by Israeli and Western circles abroad. However, Starlink connections are few, as Iran's parliament has banned it in the wake of the 12-day US-Israel war last June, criminalizing it as an act of espionage and against national security. Remarks by Western leaders in support of the unrest, in particular by US President Donald Trump threatening to use force in the wake of crackdown of the protests, have increased the tension in the region. Meantime, Iran's Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi and Secretary of Supreme National Security Council Ali Larijani have been in intense diplomatic contacts with their foreign counterparts. According to official sources, in 13 telephone conversations this week, they condemned foreign meddling in Iran's internal affairs and promised retaliation if Iran was attacked by US and Israel again. The contacts were made amid reports of differences among US officials on whether to resume diplomacy or to invade Iran again, as well as the concerns and opposition of regional countries to Trump's threat. A number of Iran's neighboring countries are hosting US military bases, as there are reports that US is evacuating sections of Al Udeid base in Qatar and Ain al-Assad base in Iraq, expecting Iran's retaliatory response to a US raid. Turaj Shiralilu, Tehran, A News.
Georgia is increasingly turning to the east to strengthen its economic partnership. In Abu Dhabi, Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze held high-level talks with the leadership of the United Arab Emirates, highlighting major investments and signaling Tbilisi's growing focus on cooperation with Gulf states. Our correspondent Nini Nikolashvili reports.
Georgian Prime Minister Irakli Kobakidze, who is in Abu Dhabi to participate in Abu Dhabi Sustainability Week, met with the United Arab Emirates President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan as part of ongoing efforts to deepen bilateral relations between the two countries. According to the Georgian government, the meeting focused on the positive dynamics of the Georgia and the United Arab Emirates relations, which have intensified in recent years due to close political dialogue and expanding economic cooperation. The Georgian side emphasized that last year's official visit of the UAE president to Georgia played an important role in giving new momentum to the partnership. A key focus of the talks was investment cooperation. Georgian officials highlighted the $6.6 billion investment by Eagle Hills, calling it a historic project that reflects the UAE's long-term confidence in Georgia's economy. The investment is expected to support urban development, tourism, and related sectors, while also sending a strong signal to other potential investors from the Gulf region. The meeting also addressed infrastructure and logistics cooperation, particularly the Tbilisi Dry Port project, which is being implemented with the UAE investment. The project is seen as strategically important for Georgia's ambition to become a regional transit hub, strengthening connectivity between Europe and Asia and supporting the development of the Middle Corridor project. The Georgian delegation in Abu Dhabi included senior ministers responsible for foreign affairs, economy, environment, justice, and government administration, underlining the high priority Georgia places on relations with the UAE and on expanding economic ties with the Gulf states. Nini Nikolashvili, Tbilisi, A News.
Turkey is continuing its diplomatic outreach in the Gulf as regional tensions remain high. Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan visited the United Arab Emirates for talks with the country's leadership.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan has held high-level talks in the United Arab Emirates during a visit to Abu Dhabi. Fidan met with UAE President Sheikh Mohammed bin Zayed Al Nahyan at the presidential palace, where the two leaders discussed bilateral relations. Turkish diplomatic sources say the talks focused on rapidly improving ties between Ankara and Abu Dhabi after a period of earlier tensions. While in the Emirati capital, Fidan also held talks with UAE Foreign Minister and Deputy Prime Minister Sheikh Abdullah bin Zayed Al Nahyan. In a statement, the UAE Foreign Ministry said the discussions had focused on strengthening cooperation within the strategic relationship between the two countries. Sheikh Abdullah highlighted the depth of current ties and said Turkey and the UAE share an advanced and productive partnership across several fields. The talks also covered regional and international developments, with both sides exchanging views on issues of common concern. The UAE Foreign Minister stressed the importance of supporting efforts aimed at regional stability and lasting peace in the Middle East. Fidan's visit comes amid mounting regional tensions, including fears of a possible U.S. military strike on Iran and a growing political rift between the UAE and Saudi Arabia. Ankara says it will continue diplomatic engagement with key partners as developments unfold across the region. This is Adam Maro for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Turkish Foreign Minister Hakan Fidan said that Ankara is opposed to any military intervention against Iran. Fidan's remarks came during his meeting with journalists in Istanbul. Speaking at a press conference, Fidan said Turkey will continue its diplomatic initiatives regarding Iran.
We are against a military intervention in Iran. Iran needs to resolve its own internal, authentic problems. Of course, there's also the international dimension to this. What is that? It's subject to sanctions. And why are they subject to sanctions? Because of some of the policies they've pursued, both globally and regionally. We tell them that they need to resolve their problems with regional countries. They must also resolve their global nuclear issues through diplomacy, without wasting any opportunity, so that structural problems that cause economic difficulties are eliminated.
A new forecast by the World Bank points to a slowdown in Kazakhstan's economic growth in 2026, while the country continues to rely on external trade and energy revenues. The bank highlights a combination of economic risks, including inflation, weaker domestic demand, and shifting export conditions. Our correspondent Fariza Kalimurzina reports from Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan's economy is set to slow down, according to a new forecast by the World Bank, which points to rising external risks for the largest economy in Central Asia. The bank estimates Kazakhstan's GDP growth will decline to 4.5%. Key factors include stabilizing oil production levels and lower global prices for raw materials. These developments directly affect export revenues and government income, making the economy more vulnerable to external shocks. The oil factor is already having an impact beyond Kazakhstan's borders. According to Bloomberg, lower volumes of CPC blend from Kazakhstan, combined with supply disruptions from Libya and several fields in the North Sea, have pushed prices higher across northern and Mediterranean European markets. At the start of 2026, risks to the global oil market were primarily associated with instability in Iran and Venezuela. And in practice, however, the most immediate impact has come from Kazakhstan. The key issue lies at the terminal of the Caspian Pipeline Consortium. At present, only one of its 3 offshore loading units is operational. One was damaged during a drone attack in November, while another is undergoing scheduled maintenance. Fariza Kalimurzina, Almaty, A News.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss the World Bank's warning on slowing growth in Central Asia, with a focus on Kazakhstan's economic outlook. See you shortly. Welcome back to A News. Central Asia remains the fastest growing sub-region in Europe and Central Asia, according to the World Bank. But that momentum is starting to slow. Global uncertainty, weaker demand from Russia and China, persistent inflation and falling commodity prices are creating new pressures, particularly for energy exporting economies like Kazakhstan. The World Bank's latest outlook also warns of a slowdown in Kazakhstan's growth in 2026, citing inflation, weaker domestic demand and shifting export dynamics. To unpack what this means for Kazakhstan and the wider region, I'm joined by Dr. Nurbolat Nushanbayev, economist at Turan University, joining us from Almaty, Kazakhstan. Dr. Nurbolat Nushanbayev, welcome and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for having me.
Dr. Nushanbayev, the World Bank still calls Central Asia the fastest growing sub-region. What factors have driven this performance so far?
Surely, Central Asia as a landlocked region after the pandemics have shown comparatively better economic rise comparing with other regions, in particular within the post-Soviet space. So I think one of the reasons behind those economic success is regional integration, the first. The second is the result of the decades-long economic reforms, diversification economies at some point. Also, the third reason I think is the political changes within this region over the last decade.
But why is growth now expected to slow, and how serious are the risks highlighted in the latest outlook?
So I have read also this World Bank latest outlook. At some point seems pretty reliable. Also, there is no data regarding the Turkmenistan, but when it comes to Kazakhstan, I would like to mention that I agree some forecast of the World Bank, in particular for this year, because we see the main three reasons why there will be likelihood of the slowing down economy. The first one is dependence on Russia. Still, Kazakhstani trade routes, we export most of the oils and the gas via the territories of Russia. Subsequently, the Caspian Consortium pipeline is getting quite often under the drone attacks. All those geopolitical instability regarding the Russia, it's bringing some economic challenges to the Kazakhstan. It's the first reason. The second, I think, it's a price fluctuation. It doesn't depend only on Russia, but to the whole region, in particular regarding the latest geopolitical tensions on Iran, on Venezuela, also the geopolitical interest backlash between the great powers is fluctuating the price. So therefore, as a nation, as a Kazakhstan, who depends on the oil price, who gets its GDP around 80% from the selling oil and gas, definitely it's one of the threats to the national economy. The third is protectionism, I think, because in the last few years we have seen it's a rise in protectionism and the globalization at some point under crisis. So therefore, the result of the World Bank outlook seems at some point it's meet with the realities. We will see by the end of the year how it will change.
Dr. Nushanbayev, the World Bank mentions weaker domestic demand. What does this tell us about household consumption and business confidence in Kazakhstan?
Exactly, because Kazakhstan, with the territories number 9 in the world, but with a population, it's a 20 million population. So therefore, the internal consumption is slower comparing with our even neighbor countries. So therefore, definitely for the business, for the middle class, for the entrepreneurship, time by time it will be kind of difficult creating local markets. So therefore, Kazakhstan tries to create as a hub, not only selling to the local markets, but as well as making its hub re-exporting to the neighbor countries. So therefore, that definitely shows to what extent Kazakhstan economy is integrated with the local and the regional economy at first. The second is definitely is a weaker consumption rate within the local communities. I think this issue shouldn't be considered as a local problem, but as a uniqueness of the Kazakhstan's system as a landlocked countries who has enough for the local market, but depends on the experts. I think there is many other example countries like Kazakhstan in Europe too, that's bringing within this economic time frame some challenges, those kind of countries with a slower local market.
Climate risks, including droughts, are highlighted by the bank. How prepared is Central Asia to manage these long-term challenges?
Yes, we shouldn't underestimate the consequences of the climate change related crisis, because historically Central Asia, one of the regions who had experienced a very negative experience from the climate change related, for example, in the example of Aral Sea or semi-polygons. But in the last couple of 3 years, Kazakhstan is becoming one of the nations promoting sustainable development goals, including the climate change agendas. So therefore, it depends not only Kazakhstan, I think it depends to other Central Asian countries too. Because when we fighting against climate change or when we run reforms, it depends integration, it depends collaboration with the neighbor countries, because we have a transborder, rivers, and the many other aspects. So therefore, if we underestimate the power of the climate change related crisis, definitely for the long term it may bring some economic challenges. In this regard, World Bank report, I think it's close to the truth. So therefore, not only for Kazakhstan but for many other countries, climate change, it will bring some tough economic consequences strategically for the long term. But for short term, I don't think any obstacles climate change related, in particular for 2026. But Kazakhstan is also hosting several summits and conferences regarding the climate change. But I think now the time came from talking to doing. So therefore, Kazakhstan this time considering climate change as one of the issues which is primarily related to the national economy aspect. In this point, the report highlights very well, I think.
Dr. Nurbollat Nushanbayev, thank you very much for your insights and for joining us from Almaty. We appreciate your time and expertise. Thanks a lot.
Thank you so much for having me.
You're up to date with World News for the Hour. Thank you for watching and stay tuned to A News for more.